Hi, well, I'm Lyndon Jackson, and I actually look after the Debenham project. And I always say I look after it because some people say, what is it like to run the project? What is it like to manage the project? Actually, the project runs itself, etc. Um, and if you want a particular example, somebody asked that question, what is it like to run the project? Fairly early on this was. And I had to think about it, and I said, well, it's a bit like letting the tiger out of the cage. You know, it's off and away, and I'm hanging on to its tail, trying to steer it a little bit, but it's a naturally evolving project. So that's me. I don't come from a background of the NHS, medicine, or social care. I was a technologist, research technologist, particularly specializing in how to design and build very complicated systems. And after all, health and social care is a very complicated system. So that's me. I look after this project, but this project is really about all the massive numbers of people who have given their goodwill and effort to try and tackle a problem which is probably the major health and social care problem of this decade.
Excellent. So can you tell us where it started? Kind of what was the catalyst?
What the catalyst? Many people have said, well, how did you design this project? And the answer is no, we didn't design it. They find it difficult to cope with the fact that the project can just grow. I think the expression is it just grew like Topsy. But obviously, community projects are rather different to corporate projects. Corporate projects, yes, you've got to go through the mechanisms and all of this thing, and etc. And quite sensibly, you have to draw your plans and so on. Ours didn't start that way by any means, and I don't think any community projects really start in that way. There has to be some sort of initiation, some sort of trigger, some sort of spark. And I can go back to February the 11th in 2009. Several of us belong to the local church, and we're officially called church elders. That sounds very sort of Victorian, doesn't it? But we're church elders, and one of the things that we used to do was we meet occasionally to just look around our patches to see if there was anybody who needed a bit of support, maybe a visit from the vicar, or maybe we just have a quiet word with the GP practice or whatever. But just to make sure people didn't fall between the cracks. And on this particular evening, I think there was 6 or 7 of us there. And somebody, and I don't remember who exactly it was, but they said, dementia is not a national problem. It's a personal problem, and it's a community problem. And it is going to have a big impact on our community, that is Debenham and the surrounding villages. And so we talked about it, and as usual in most meetings, nobody knows what to do with it. But we did decide that we would try and sort of ask around and set up a meeting and say, well, is there anything that we can do, if only to increase the level of awareness. Now that's interesting because more recently, under the Prime Minister's challenge on dementia, the Dementia Friends and Dementia Friendly Communities were set up, and one of the ways they go about things is to just tell people about the impact and the nature of the illness to try and improve awareness. So in that case, I suppose we were following a route, start with a public meeting. Now we set that public meeting up April the 23rd. I remember it wasn't a particularly fine evening, and we'd advertised it, and it was advertised as this is a problem, this is the sort of impact it has on families, etc. Come and we'll talk about it and so on. And we set up a group. There was Dr. Paddy Fielder, who was at that time our senior practitioner for the GP practice. We had a senior mental health social worker who had worked with people with dementia many years, an eminent retired neurologist, who sadly has now passed away, and Joe Buggins here, who's I don't know why it was, but it just seemed that somebody'd got to sort of be the circus master. Anyway, as you do with these things, you twiddle your thumbs and think, well, we'll get 4 or 5 people and we'll sort of do something. But over 70 people turned up. And out of that meeting, some very important things emerged. Probably the first one was that there is out there a lot of goodwill and potential support. Because most of the people who were involved in that meeting were people who either had been family carers, possibly still were, in some cases, or had close relatives who had one form or another of dementia. So that exists right across the country, obviously. But in our case, there were 70-odd people who were roughly in those sort of categories. Secondly, they said quite clearly, we'd like to do something, but we don't know what to do. Tell us what to do and we'll do it. And that led us to the philosophy of get on and do something. It doesn't matter what you do. Just do something, because you'll very quickly understand whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. If it seems to be the wrong thing to do, well, don't throw it away, but just set it on one side. But build on, let's say, the bottom up. Build on an idea, because if you had that idea, it was probably had good reasons for being that idea. So get on and do something. And that's been a mantra that we've pushed and pushed and pushed over the years. Then it was, this is a community project. And one great motivator is for people will help and move heaven and earth for their own. So, they're helping their friends, their neighbours, their people in their community. And it's because of that this project has never had a problem as far as volunteers are concerned. Nowadays, currently, we have something in the order of 120 odd volunteers. That's people who we may not have used their talents yet, but we know that if we go to them and ask them, will you do this, they will move heaven and earth to do that. So it's confidence that the commitment exists. So there was that community. Now, in our circumstance, our community is loosely defined for the purpose of the project as 4 miles from the centre of Debenham. Why 4 miles? Because 4 miles is halfway between here and somewhere else. And what does that mean? It means that this is probably seen as the natural centre of population, or a natural centre of population, for those people who we hope we're going to be helping to support. And then the next thing was focus on supporting the family carer. Because by and large it's the family carer who's going to take the brunt of the problems. Now that's not to say that the family carer is the only person we support. We also support the person that they're caring for, because if you support the person you care for, you support the family carer. You support the family carer, you support the person. And there's already an indication that traditionally one organisation supporting the family carer and the NHS supporting the person who's being cared for, the person with illness, is not actually what we're looking for. We're looking more towards a holistic approach which meets the needs of that family unit as a unit, rather than 2 separate entities. Does that make sense? Well, so there was focus on the family carer, and our initial aims were to provide practical and emotional support to family carers of those with dementia and those that they care for. So in that sense, we're saying we're also focusing on dementia. Now, at that initial meeting, there were people who said, but there are plenty of, lots of lonely people. There are lots of other people. Yes, that's very true, and they're equally important. But where we felt it was important was to have focus. No project, no matter what it is, can exist unless it really knows where it wants to go, what its aims and objectives are, and the boundaries of that. We can't solve the world. We couldn't build a project for Suffolk. We couldn't build a project for all older people. So we have to focus on dementia. And that's really the foundation of this project. From there, it's all history, really. It evolved. And by the October, we publicly launched the project. And by then, we had support and involvement, goodwill from the local authorities, the NHS, Mental Health Trust, for example, charities, and so on. And we were able to launch the project, and we had over 150 attendees at that launch, who all basically said, great, let's get on and do it. Let's get on and do something. And at that stage, we had put together some rudimentary, and I tell you they were fragile, services stroke activities. We'd borrowed from the church, a Mothers Union type club called Cameo, Come and Meet Each Other, and we'd adapted it to be a sort of activities and social session. We'd put in place the most rudimentary weekend evenings confidential telephone support line. We had 3 people who were professionals at that stage, but we were in the process of training another 10. So, that was, a start. We had a website that when you tried to launch on the day and it didn't work, we've all been there, haven't we? You hope, this website, but that website you've seen, and and it works. It's good. It's not fancy. It's just basic, but it seems to work. And we had launched our very first lunch club the previous Tuesday. So we were on our way. Now, over the years that have followed, we've worked on the principle that if it seems a good idea, we'll try it. We'll try it, we'll explore it and try it, and so on. We don't have a large bureaucracy or anything like this. It's really down to, you've got a good idea, well, let's support you, and we'll work together, and we'll see what can come out of it. One of those things that came out was our Fit Club. Our Fit Club is really chair-based exercises, etc. And it's broader than just dementia, as it happens. But maybe we can say why that is later on. And now we come to, after 6 years, and I'd like to sort of emphasize that it's not a process that you can do overnight. It's not something you can parachute into a community, whatever. It's a grassroots growth upwards. And it has to be done from within the community, because it's incredibly important. Ownership. This is our project. It's not anybody else's. It's not the local authorities. It's not the NHS's. It's not the charities, etc. We do it, and we have a different model to theirs. To ourselves, well, this seems like a good idea. We'll try it out. But if we need professional skills, we try to draw them in collaboratively, because we as volunteers can't actually replace professionally skilled people in the charities and the local authorities and the NHS. What we can do is we can utilise their skills within this particular framework. So, for example, in our Carers Club and Info Cafe, which came along later, which was, if you like, one of the very early dementia cafes, we always managed to have a dementia advisor, professional dementia advisor, or somebody who was a professional dementia advisor as a volunteer, there to open up any problems people are having, to be able to talk to them privately or confidentially, or and just to look around the people who are there and say, is there anybody I really should be looking towards? You know, it provides a monitor. So drawing in that professional skills, it takes 3 years minimum, then at least 3 years of experience before you're good at that sort of thing. So you know, it doesn't make sense to say volunteers replace professionals. It doesn't make sense to say we are cutting the cost of the statutory services by replacing them. It doesn't make sense. What we're doing is we are providing primarily the support to our residents, those families who are living with the impact of dementia on their lives, and in so doing we are assisting, you know, the statutory services. It's, you know, we both gain by it. So that's where we are now. We have 3 lunch clubs, we have fortnightly carers club and info cafe, we have a weekly fit club, exercise, chair-based exercises, we have a relaxation therapy group which meets twice a month. What else do we have? Well, it goes on. We have an informal transport network that helps to get people to and from hospital. We have a means of putting people in touch when they need domestic help or personal care. We have sort of emergency sort of arrangements where if somebody's really desperate and they need somebody to sit in, we can do that. We try our best. It's all based on informality. So we have informal networks. We don't actually sort of say, this is the Debenham project and here is the managing director, Lyndon Jackson, and here are all his staff. It's not like that at all. It's like somebody said, why don't you come for lunch? And I've got a few friends. They're friends, they're family. Nobody leaves the project when they come into it as, you know, people who are struggling, and we try to provide a bit of help and support. Without help and support, we know, because we see it, we know that most families will bump along the bottom of the quality of life road. With a little bit of help and support, particularly knowing that people care, people within their community care, and will just, sometimes you just need to listen. That can make a huge difference. More than medication. And remember that we're really medicating, in inverted commas, not the person with the illness, but the person who's doing the caring. And with one and the other, they react one against the other. So you can easily imagine that if you've got families who are deeply frustrated because the person they're caring for isn't the person that they married and loved, and is irritating, and I was there, and I didn't handle it well with my mother, then they react against each other and they go down. If, on the other hand, you can create an environment which is more positive, then they will react together and go up. But nobody's saying you can cure it. Nobody's saying, we don't say you can live well with dementia. You cannot live well with dementia. What you can do is you can live better than you would have done otherwise. And in my view, that's worth a fortune.